It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
Hey, welcome back to another edition of the Real Estate Breakfast on our weekend, launching into another episode with more property information. Plenty of it, and we are talking real estate 7 days a week, and we get a number of your emails, and if you'd like to let us know how your property journey is going, especially around the frustration piece to it, you can email us at myrealestatepodcast@gmail.com. Well, it is a Sunday morning, June the 29th. Coming up, we are reflecting back over the last 7 days, kicking off with Michelle May, who we spoke to on Monday, a buyer's agent there in Sydney. Many Sydney homeowners are refusing to budge on their asking price, something that we talked about on Monday. On Tuesday, Tim Abbott was here from Sydney on the lower North Shore, talking about the way in which some of these new apartments are being spec'd. And we also spoke about the Grenfell Tower tragedy in London, which is currently screening on Netflix. If you haven't seen it, you got to see this one. It does cast that shadow. Over 70 people lost their lives due to the highly flammable cladding that was put up on the exterior. We sort of dived into that with Margaret Lomas, asking the question, what is happening on some of these high-rises in Australia, because that cladding is there. And we also spoke to Lyndall Allen in Newcastle. She gave us a little bit of a breakdown on what is happening in her area. And we talked tiny homes with Louise. So that is all coming up on our Real Estate Breakfast for Sunday morning.
We are your local source for unbiased, expert insights into the world of real estate. We are not a real estate company. Our only objective is to help you better understand the real estate market.
Oh, look, we do see that day to day. We obviously watch listings very carefully, and what we're seeing in that, particularly that higher density locations around Sydney, the newer and newish properties are really struggling, because I always liken it to buying a new car. As soon as you drive it off the forecourt, it actually loses a percentage in its value straight away. And I don't think most property buyers realize that when they're going for the shiny new off-the-plan properties marketed to them.
How sort of affected are people, do you think, in terms of they've got the pain on an apartment? Maybe they could it for the same money that they paid for it when they initially bought it. Maybe they lose money. But what does that do in terms of sentiment moving forward and buying more new stock from this cohort of people that have already done that? So they're kind of in the lane of being prepared to buy off plan, where not everybody kind of has that mindset. So it must affect the market somewhat.
Well, it does, and particularly if you take into consideration that a really large proportion of these newer buildings that are, say, less than 10 years old have major building defects and, seriously high strata levies and things like that. So I think that is probably one of the reasons why these people are selling sooner rather than later. I actually have had many clients who have come to me and bought off the plan, and they're like, we need to get out because we can hear our neighbors going to the bathroom. We have been slapped with special levies and we can't afford, $2,500 a quarter on our apartment, if not more. I think one lesson learned for many of those, I think that they will not buy newer off the plan again, I would say. So you mentioned this before, buyers are becoming much more savvy when it comes to these new properties. There have been many buildings in the media. I can show you many, many more that never made the media that really people should not even be considering buying into.
Yeah, I want to get to this question about the agent dilemma. They go in trying to win a listing. The vendor, the owner, turns around and says, well, this is my sell price. The real estate agent says to herself, well, that's not really what the market value is right now. But they say, yes, we'll do it for that price, knowing full well that it's too expensive. But they're playing the long game here, Michelle. And of course, after a period of time, the vendor comes to their senses and the property eventually sells.
Well, that's what you would hope, but we're seeing more and more properties actually in our areas where it changes from agent to agent. So the first agent tries, market says no, the listing expires, and then the vendor moves on to the next agent, and so forth and so on. Sometimes not changing their vendor expectation. I mean, there's a very famous story about a house in Haberfield that has been up for sale at one point or another over the last 10 years. And every time comes up with an agent, it's about $1 million more than what its market value is. So it's a tricky one, but obviously the agent should be informing the vendor, these are the comparable sales, this is what your property is worth, and this is how we can list it accordingly. When they're trying to, what they call buy the listing, get the vendor to sign an agency agreement. I think that is due to the very competitive market, that they're in when it comes to sales agents. It's very cutthroat, and then some agents do exactly that. They manage the vendor's expectations whilst the property is for sale.
And that UNSW study does show what you're highlighting, and that is families, downsizers and professionals, they are embracing these 3-bedders and even 4-bedroom apartments that do blend community with privacy. Developments in Sydney are offering expansive layouts, it would have to be said, and even the heritage properties, they're not missing out on the action. They seem to have acquired these new inspired designs. So quite a change there going on at your end, Tim.
Yeah, no, it's interesting how it all changes. It really is fascinating, and the different buyer types. And what's really encouraging is, as agents, we talk to people day in and day out. We give feedback to the developers, and the good thing is they're listening and incorporating it into the new developments. As you say, the fact of having a community within a building as well is an important point. We've got development in Willoughby of 150 apartments. They've broken those down into 5 smaller boutique blocks, lots of landscaping. And it really is resonating well with the purchasers who are moving in. It's just about complete. We've seen this with larger style townhouses across the lower North Shore as well. Back maybe 10 years ago, they were trying to build them as small as possible, but those days have gone. I think the developers are realising that this is a long-term stay for purchasers, and they need the size and the comfort, and they're incorporating that into the development, which is great.
Yeah, the Master Builders Association of New South Wales did report a sharp rise in demand for these 3-bedroom apartments. Once a rarity, now up to 50% of new developments. So that really does paint the picture. The unit market and these developers in Sydney, particularly where you are in the lower North Shore, I mean, so much has been going on post-COVID, and it just continues to sort of ramp up. I know that probably 2 years ago there were some developers that were just sitting on the fence, but there seems to be a bit more of a momentum push. Is that fair to say at the moment?
Yeah, that's right. It's interesting in this lower North Shore and across the Sydney area, there's been some recent zoning changes. The planning controls really didn't allow for a lot of new development across the lower North Shore and across Sydney. But recently the state government said we need more housing, and they've incorporated some pretty significant changes all across Sydney to get more medium density apartments and townhouses into the area. So all of a sudden we're seeing a lot more land opening up and a lot more activity. So the good news is, for purchasers, there's going to be a lot more choice, a lot more of this type of apartment living coming to really across all of the town centres across Sydney. So they've done it in such a way that anything within 800 square metres of a town centre and transport has been uplifted in density. And so we're starting to see those development sites transact, and another year or so they'll be out of the ground and be available for people to purchase. So it's a really changing environment here.
Now, we talk about these medians. Over 900 grand, as I say, but it's not as easy as that, is it? Because you've kind of got to drill down into some of the other numbers to sort of give you the right sort of breakdown.
I completely agree. And I think Newcastle, especially the coastal fringes of Newcastle, do really not give you a strong indication of what a property is worth. So say, for example, Merewether, which is our strongest suburb as far as sales go. I sold a house last year on the beach for 11 million and 50, so to speak, which then increases the average like a lot. However, there's homes that we're selling for under $1 million in the same suburb. So it's a bit of a tricky one. I think the average it's not a strong indication as regards to the region because, your waterfront properties and the homes in the heart of the city, they'll be worth millions more than properties that are only, a couple of 100 meters away. So I do find, to be honest, that those averages don't work as well when the prices can change dramatically from street to street.
And Lyndall, recently I was talking to a couple who made the move out of Sydney. He was amazed and pretty happy with himself. He sold a 3-bedroom property. I can't remember the suburb, but I believe is coming up to retirement age. And he and his wife, instead of downsizing, they went from a 3-bedroom to a 5-bedroom and had plenty of money in the bank, which he was smiling about.
Absolutely. And why wouldn't you? Especially with the lifestyle that Newcastle has to offer. I have definitely seen, even with the interest rates dropping already this year, we are seeing a lot more from Sydney coming in as far as the inquiries go, probably more from an investment perspective. But look, Newcastle's a phenomenal city. We have a huge infrastructure which has come a long way. Like a lot of people had the perception of Newcastle as a mining town, but we are a huge growing region and we have a lot of strong assets. So, for example, the university, the John Hunter Hospital, our amazing beaches, the Hunter Valley is 45 minutes away, Port Stephens is 45 minutes away. We have an airport which can take you to pretty much anywhere in Australia within 25 minutes. And I think it's just the lifestyle. Everywhere's 5 minutes in Newcastle. Like you're not in traffic jams to get to where you need to go. You can get a park at the beach. There's beautiful restaurants. So it does have a lot to offer, but it's also so much more affordable than Sydney, for example.
Well, welcome to the travel show with Lyndall Allen.
I love my city. I'm very proud to be a Novocastrian.
We know that there is a lot of these first-home buyers deciding to buy the units because it's a cheaper way into the real estate market, but not necessarily fully understanding what's at play here.
I'm really glad that you've raised this topic because it has been an ongoing issue for a long time now, so long that I recall up to 5 years ago interviewing Michael Tees, who's a lawyer and a person who's really up to date on all of this. He was telling me then about how bad the situation was in Australia and how it's possible that up to 80% of unit blocks that have been built in the last 25 or so years have some form of combustible cladding, if not over the entire building, certainly on parts of the building, and that many of these buildings and building managers and strata corporations aren't even aware that they have this combustible cladding. And so therefore they're not becoming part of any rectification program. And if it's not bad enough that we also have a situation where probably 80% of buildings or apartment blocks built in the last 25 years also have significant water ingress problems. And we've seen that play out in some of the bigger towers where we've had to have entire blocks of residents move out because their properties are so water affected that they become unstable. Now we have this as well, and it makes it a little bit scary to be a buyer of a unit.
I thought what we would do this morning, Louise, is perhaps get you to talk about the top 5 things to consider before, making this leap into a tiny home.
Absolutely. I'm happy to do that. It's something that's close to my heart. And I think a lot of people are very curious about how to get into tiny house living and whether it would work for them. I guess the first thing to think about, before you decide whether tiny house living will work for you is looking at your own life and family situation, whether you have kids or are a couple or have pets. Also thinking about what's important to you in terms of how you want to spend your time, because tiny house living does free up a lot of time. And that's one of the main benefits I've found, is that when your living costs are lower, because I rent land to put my tiny house on, so I actually can do less paid work and volunteer and spend more time with family, do the kind of creative work that I want to do.
It's a really good point that you're making, because if you don't have a mortgage, for example, you don't have this huge financial noose around your neck. What you're saying is very relevant. You can take less work, spend less time working because you don't have all of that pressure. Is that fair to say?
I think you're right on the money, Craig. I think that's one of the main benefits for me, that I could never service a mortgage on a freelance writer's income, and it would have just stressed me out trying to do that. I think, I'm probably paying maybe a third of the rent I'm paying for the land where I park my tiny house, a third of the rent that I would be paying if I was renting even a studio apartment. In the northern New South Wales, rents here are really crazy. Some of them are comparable to capital cities now, and even a room in a share house. I saw one advertised the other day. It was like $400 for just a room in a house, which is crazy a week. So, so without a mortgage, you're definitely freer, and also you have less rent. So that really does free you up a lot.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.